made out of matter. Everything that happens in our world is powered by energy. Living things, including human beings, are an inseparable part of this physical world. In this two-part program, we will learn about the chemical structure of matter and how matter and energy interact to create life. Matter is the substance of everything. Matter is defined as anything that occupies space and has mass. A rock, for example, occupies space, and it also has mass. Mass is roughly the same as weight. Whereas energy ignites our world, providing the spark and the fire for movement and change. Energy is the power within nature, the violent builder of mountains, and the gentle caress of a butterfly. It is energy flowing from the sun that lights up our world, and is used by plants to create the food we eat. Energy is defined as the capacity to do work. In other words, the capacity to make something happen, like a bee working to gather pollen. But sometimes energy is hidden in a form we cannot see or feel. When we set a mousetrap, we load energy into the spring. We might say that energy is stored in the mousetrap. Stored energy such as this is called potential energy. Potential energy is invisible to us, but we know it's there. For when the trap is sprung, that potential energy changes into motion. The energy of motion is also called kinetic energy. Energy is stored everywhere around us. Ordinary wood is a tremendous storehouse of potential energy, which may be released by fire. The potential energy stored in wood is called chemical energy. In one respect, life is like fire, because living things also feed on chemical energy. It is potential energy, chemical energy stored within matter, that makes life possible. To understand the chemistry of life, we must first look at how matter is organized. The story of the chemistry of life starts with a fantastically small bit of matter, the atom. An atom is too small to imagine. Its diameter is less than 100 millionth of an inch. It would take more than 1 million atoms, edge to edge, to equal the thickness of a sheet of paper. At the center of the atom is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus is composed of two kinds of subatomic particles. One of these particles is the proton. The proton has a positive electrical charge. The nucleus may contain one or many protons. The other particle found in the nucleus is the neutron. Neutrons have no electrical charge. They are electrically neutral. Surrounding the nucleus are one or more particles called electrons. The electron possesses a negative electrical charge. Electrons are always in motion, whirling furiously around the nucleus. Electrons orbit the nucleus much like the planets of our solar system orbit the sun. The planets are held in orbit by gravitational attraction to the sun. Electrons are held in their orbits by electrical attraction to the protons in the nucleus. Positive attracts negative. There are many different kinds of atoms. Each has its own characteristic number of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Each kind of atom represents a different type of pure substance called an element. For example, this silver coin is made up of atoms of the element silver. All silver atoms are identical. This copper pipe is made up of identical copper atoms, each with a structure that is unique to the element copper. In all, there are 92 different naturally occurring elements, each with its own unique type of atom. The simplest atom is that of the element hydrogen. An atom of hydrogen has just one proton and one electron, and it has no neutrons. An atom of helium is only slightly larger than that of hydrogen. A helium atom has 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. But most atoms are larger. For example, the element oxygen has 8 protons, 8 neutrons, and 8 electrons. Each element is represented by a different chemical symbol. The symbol for oxygen, for example, is O, helium is He, hydrogen is H, and so forth. Often the chemical symbol is the first 1 or 2 letters of the name, as is the case of oxygen, helium, hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen. But there are exceptions. The symbol for sodium, for example, is Na, taken from the Latin word natrum. We have seen that the atom is the basic particle making up the elements. But atoms do not always exist as separate, detached particles. In fact, in the Earth's environment, they rarely do. Instead, atoms interact with each other and connect together. 2 atoms may connect, or there may be many. The groups of atoms that result we call molecules. A molecule is simply 2 or more atoms bonded together. For example, 2 atoms of hydrogen can bond together to form the diatomic hydrogen molecule. It is the same for oxygen. When oxygen atoms unite, they form the diatomic oxygen molecule. These unions are accomplished by the sharing of electrons between atoms. Atoms of different elements can interact with each other as well. For example, 2 hydrogen atoms can combine with 1 oxygen atom to form a molecule of water. This is a simple example of a chemical reaction, which is the interaction of atoms to create new substances. In this instance, hydrogen and oxygen have reacted and bonded together to create water. A chemical bond is the powerful force of attraction which keeps atoms together in a molecule. Every molecule stores a certain amount of potential energy within its chemical bonds. The water molecule may be represented by the symbols H2O. This is known as the chemical formula for water. This formula shows that each molecule of water contains 2 hydrogen atoms, represented by H2, and 1 oxygen atom, represented by an O. Water is an example of a very simple chemical compound. A compound is 2 or more elements chemically bonded together. Living things are made up of many thousands of different compounds. Life can be thought of as a vast series of interconnected chemical reactions, for life itself is a chemical process. Every heartbeat and every breath of living things has a basis in chemistry, the marvelous interaction of matter and energy. Most scientists believe that life began on Earth as a result of reactions that took place between simple chemicals which existed on Earth from its beginning. Among the most abundant of these elements present on the early Earth were hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. Today, about 95% of all living matter consists of just these 4 elements. Over billions of years, these 4 elements, plus small amounts of about 20 other elements, gradually formed larger and more complex compounds. Some of these compounds would hold the key to life. These were the compounds containing carbon. Carbon is special in that one carbon atom can bond with up to 4 other atoms. And, most importantly, carbon can easily bond with itself. This characteristic allows carbon to form large molecules. In nature, these molecules may take the form of chains of carbon atoms, or rings may be formed. Sometimes there are combinations of these. Attached to the carbons may be atoms of other elements, especially hydrogen, oxygen, or nitrogen. But carbon remains at the center of these kinds of molecules. It provides the skeleton for most of the compounds essential to life. Carbon-containing compounds, such as these, are called organic compounds. On Earth, organic compounds are almost exclusively associated with life. In fact, living things may be thought of as miniature chemical factories that together process millions of tons of organic compounds every day. All plants are natural chemical factories, and a particularly good example may be found in the sugar beet plant seen here. These plants produce huge amounts of sugar, which is harvested and extracted from where it is stored in the thick roots of the plant. Sugars belong to a class of chemicals called carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are compounds made up of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. There are many different kinds of sugar, but one in particular lies at the center of the chemistry of life. That sugar is called glucose. Glucose is made up of 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen, arranged in a ring-shaped structure. This simple ring is the building block from which more complex molecules are formed. This joining process, creating larger molecules from simple units, is called polymerization. The compounds that result are called polymers. In some cases, very large numbers of glucose molecules become joined, creating enormous molecules. A good example of a very long polymer of glucose is a compound called cellulose, found in the cell walls of plants. The wood in this tree trunk is mostly cellulose. Cellulose lends rigidity to the stems of plants, allowing them to grow upright. Whereas some polymers, such as cellulose, are structural, others are used by living things to store chemical energy. Starch is a good example. Starches, such as those concentrated in this potato, are nothing more than very long chains of glucose molecules bonded together in a slightly different way than they are in cellulose. Lipids, also known as fats and oils, make up another basic class of life-sustaining chemical compounds. Like carbohydrates, lipids are composed of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And as with carbohydrates, large amounts of potential energy can be stored in the chemical bonds of these compounds. In fact, a single gram of fat from these cattle, or oil from these nuts, stores twice the energy of a gram of potato starch. In addition to carbohydrates and lipids, the bodies of all living things contain another important class of compounds called proteins. Proteins are made up of chains of simple molecules called amino acids. There are some 24 different kinds of amino acid molecules. Any of these different units may become joined together to form a protein, and they may be joined in any order. The way a protein functions in a cell is determined by the kinds of amino acids it contains and the particular order that they appear in the protein chain. Most proteins are extremely large molecules. Some may contain in excess of 100,000 amino acid units. Proteins function in many important ways. For example, in blood, there's a protein molecule called hemoglobin that carries oxygen throughout the body, while other proteins may serve a structural or mechanical function, such as the muscle fibers seen here. But the vast majority of proteins function in a very different way as enzymes. Enzymes are proteins which affect the speed of specific chemical reactions. Without enzymes, most chemical reactions within living matter would take a very long time to reach completion, if they even reacted at all. Whereas, with the correct enzyme, the same slow reaction might take less than a second to complete. The nucleic acids, very large compounds which are needed to store and process information inside of cells, make up the final class of chemicals essential to life. Like proteins, nucleic acids are made up of long chains of molecular subunits, in this case called nucleotides. But while 24 amino acid subunits are found in protein, nucleic acids are formed from just a few different kinds of nucleotides. The chromosomes of all living things contain huge molecules of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, which hold the master set of instructions that control both the day-to-day operation and the reproduction of cells. Whereas several types of ribonucleic acid, or RNA, act as intermediaries in the flow of information within the cell. We can see by now that living matter is built up of masses of different chemicals, and that life is an intricate web of interconnected chemical reactions. All of the chemical reactions occurring within living things, considered together, are called metabolism. In the next part of this program, we will learn about the two metabolic processes most essential to life: cellular respiration and photosynthesis. As we have seen, life in all its richness and variety is based on chemical processes. In other words, what we see and appreciate as the miracle of life can be thought of as the sum total of many complex chemical activities. We recall that living things are composed of matter, and that certain classes of carbon-based compounds have evolved as the physical basis for life. Now, we will turn our attention to the other foundation of life, which is energy. To carry out the vast chemical activities of life, all living things require a source of free energy, that is, energy that is available for use, so that they may grow and do the chemical work necessary to sustain life. In the world of living things, certain chemical reactions called exergonic reactions produce this free energy, while certain other reactions called endergonic reactions absorb free energy. To understand this, we recall that chemical bonds within molecules possess stored chemical energy. When bonds are formed, energy is stored in the bonds, and when bonds are broken, energy is released. But every chemical reaction involves both the breaking of existing bonds and the formation of new ones. Energy stored in the old bonds passes into the new. In a chemical reaction, if the original bonds contain more energy than the new bonds need, there will be an energy surplus, so this reaction will release free energy. This is an exergonic reaction. However, if the new bonds require more energy than the original bonds can provide, the new bonds will consume any free energy that may be present. This is an endergonic reaction. All life is the result of the constant interplay between these two classes of reactions. now let us look at an extraordinary chemical that lies at the heart of these energy exchanges. Nearly all of the free energy used in cells is released from a very important chemical called adenosine triphosphate, commonly abbreviated ATP. As we might have guessed from its name, adenosine triphosphate is made up of a molecule called adenosine with 3 phosphate groups connected to it. These are special chemical groups composed of the elements phosphorus and oxygen. ATP directly energizes the chemical processes of life. This man may not realize it, but he could not work or move about without ATP. ATP delivers the energy that his muscles need to contract. Warm-blooded animals such as this squirrel rely on free energy from ATP to provide body heat. The specific source of this usable energy is the 3rd phosphate bond of ATP. When this bond is broken, free energy is provided to the cell, and a new compound, adenosine diphosphate, is formed, along with inorganic phosphate. ADP has just 2 phosphates rather than 3. If living things did not constantly renew their supply of ATP, the levels of ADP and inorganic phosphate would build up inside of their cells. Therefore, it is critical that some way exists for putting the pieces of ATP back together again. That is, for creating new ATP from ADP, inorganic phosphate, and free energy. However, accomplishing this feat in living things is no simple matter. Somehow, new energy must be brought into the organism from outside to replace the energy that has been used up. Many organisms, including all animals, take in new energy through their food. High-energy compounds are simply eaten and digested, and energy-rich molecules are delivered to cells throughout the organism. The survival of these organisms depends upon a supply of ready-made foods. But where does this food come from? Ultimately, it comes from another group of organisms that capture energy through a marvelous process called photosynthesis. The meaning of photosynthesis is hidden in the word itself. Photo refers to light, and synthesis means to bring together. So photosynthesis means to bring together using light. Specifically, light energy is used to bring together carbon dioxide and water to create the sugar glucose. In a typical plant, water for photosynthesis is drawn into the plant through its roots and is pulled upward through the stems into the leaves. Air containing carbon dioxide enters the leaves through tiny openings in the leaf surface called stomata. Photosynthesis takes place in the leaves and green stems. Sunlight striking these surfaces will be captured and used to form the chemical bonds of glucose. As we will see later, the energy stored in these glucose bonds is used during another metabolic process called cellular respiration to form new ATP. Photosynthesis occurs in plants, in algae, and in some bacteria. In all but the most primitive organisms, the process of capturing sunlight takes place in green-colored organelles called chloroplasts. The chloroplast seen here is found in the cytoplasm of a single-celled alga. The cells of higher plants contain large numbers of chloroplasts. An individual chloroplast is bounded by an outer membrane and an inner membrane that enclose the stroma, a region of the chloroplast that consists of dense, enzyme-rich fluids. Within the stroma, layers of the thialcoid membrane are concentrated in special stacks called grana. The greenish color of the grana is due to the high concentration of an extremely unusual molecule called chlorophyll, the molecule that actually captures the energy of sunlight during photosynthesis. Now let us take a simplified look at the process of photosynthesis and the explosive energy that drives it. The awesome explosion of a hydrogen bomb releases an enormous amount of energy. It is ironic that deadly thermonuclear reactions hold the key to all life on Earth. For in the sun, incomprehensibly powerful explosions of hydrogen gas create the light for photosynthesis. A minute fraction of the energy generated by the sun's nuclear reactions radiates toward the Earth. On Earth, green plants present their leaves toward the sun to receive this energy. The first part of photosynthesis, called the light reactions of photosynthesis, begins inside a single cell of a leaf. As a tiny packet of the sun's light energy, called a photon, passes into the grana of the chloroplast, where it collides with a chlorophyll molecule. An electron in the chlorophyll molecule absorbs the photon's energy. As a result, the electron becomes excited or more highly energized. Next, almost instantaneously, the energy of the excited chlorophyll electron is used to bond ADP to inorganic phosphate, forming new ATP. This particular ATP will stay in the chloroplast to power a later stage of photosynthesis. Next, something important happens to the water molecules present in the chloroplast. They are split into oxygen and hydrogen, and the hydrogen is split further, separating the single electron from its proton. The oxygen so produced is free oxygen, and some of it will escape into the atmosphere. This is the source of most of the oxygen on the planet Earth. Everything to this point has prepared the scene for the second stage of photosynthesis, called the dark reactions of photosynthesis. As the name implies, these reactions can occur in the absence of light. The dark reactions take place inside the chloroplast in its fluid-filled matrix, the stroma. Here, using energy from the ATP produced earlier, plus energy-rich electrons produced by splitting water, carbon dioxide is taken apart, and its elements, carbon and oxygen, are bonded to hydrogen to form the complicated ring-shaped molecule of glucose, whose structure is diagrammed here. We may summarize the complicated process of photosynthesis more simply as follows. Energy plus 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules equals C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus 6 oxygen molecules. It would be difficult to overstate the importance of photosynthesis to our world. The sheer magnitude of photosynthesis is staggering. In 1 year, some 150 billion tons of carbon go through the photosynthetic process, making it the most massive chemical phenomenon on Earth. We owe our lives to photosynthesis, for it creates virtually all of the free oxygen on Earth. All of the food we eat comes directly or indirectly from photosynthesis. In addition to plant materials, we also consume animal products, and these animals are always nourished by photosynthetic plants. Even the countless tons of fossil fuel taken from the ground each day come from photosynthesis, for coal, oil, and natural gas are formed from the buried remains of ancient forests. Now let us return to the imaginary plant cell used in our example to see what happens when the glucose and oxygen produced by photosynthesis are used to make new ATP in the crucial reactions that comprise aerobic cellular respiration. In our plant cell, glucose and oxygen travel out of the chloroplast and into the cytoplasm. Here, the first stage of cellular respiration begins with a series of reactions called glycolysis. Glycolysis begins as glucose is broken down into molecules of a simpler compound called pyruvic acid. This releases free energy. The free energy is used to bond two ADP molecules to two molecules of inorganic phosphate, yielding two molecules of ATP. Next, the pyruvic acid passes into a minute cellular organelle called a mitochondrion. The many mitochondria embedded in the cytoplasm of each cell may be called the powerhouses of the cell, for it is within these organelles that most of the cell's energy-rich ATP is produced. In the mitochondria, pyruvic acid enters a series of reactions called the citric acid cycle. In 8 steps, assisted by enzymes, pyruvic acid is broken down to form hydrogen atoms and carbon dioxide. More energy is released, which again is harvested to form 2 more molecules of ATP. In animals, including human beings, the carbon dioxide will pass out of the cell and eventually out of the body. But in our imaginary plant cell, this carbon dioxide may be used again in photosynthesis to form more glucose. Next, the hydrogen created during the citric acid cycle is delivered to the inner membranes of the mitochondria, where it enters a final series of reactions called the electron transport system. This results in a huge energy payoff, for the electron transport system yields an enormous dividend: 32 new ATP molecules. The electron transport system also causes oxygen to be bonded to the hydrogen released during the citric acid cycle, and water is formed. The net result of all the complex reactions that comprise aerobic cellular respiration can be summed up as follows. A single molecule of glucose, when combined with 6 molecules of oxygen, will release enough energy to cause a total of 36 ADP molecules to be joined to 36 inorganic phosphate molecules, resulting in the production of 36 new ATP molecules, plus 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water. For our study, we have looked at cellular respiration in plants. But cellular respiration is found in virtually all living things. Cellular respiration in plants and animals typically requires oxygen and is therefore called aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic refers to air or oxygen. But some organisms, notably yeasts and certain bacteria, can carry out cellular respiration and produce ATP without oxygen. These organisms use a related process called anaerobic respiration. An means without, so anaerobic means without air. Whether aerobic or anaerobic, the goal of cellular respiration is the same: the production of vital ATP. ATP is indispensable because living things cannot use glucose directly to energize cell functions. They must use ATP. ATP may be thought of as a sort of money or currency that is spent by organisms to pay for the work that needs to be done to stay alive. Whereas glucose, starches, and fats store energy, like money saved in the bank, ATP is like money in the pocket, chemical money that can be spent whenever it is needed inside of cells. In this program, we have witnessed a beautiful cycle of nature. Photosynthesis, creating glucose merely from water, carbon dioxide, and raw energy. While cellular respiration uses the oxygen and glucose from photosynthesis to create ATP, releasing carbon dioxide and water back to photosynthesis. And through these remarkable processes, nearly all life on Earth is nourished and sustained.